Welcome back to the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, your host, and it's been a really long time since I've released anything, either podcasts, videos, anything at all. That's a story for another time. Today, I wanted to introduce a really special guest, somebody who has been helping me out over the past, actually, probably nearly like actually 10 years or more, but actually therapizing me as a therapist more intensely, probably for the past 18 months to 2 years.
18 months, yeah.
So with me today, I have Karis Bunney. And Karis Bunney is a yoga and Pilates teacher, sound therapist, and also a family constellations facilitator. And I'm sure I've mentioned Karis's work on the podcast before, particularly family constellations, because it's such amazing work. And I've been doing this work now. I think my first session was in February 2023. Then I did another session in, I think, September 2023. And then we've just done recently, last week, we did another session. It felt like the timing was right. So we got together and we constellated. And I had another mind-blowing session, like just unbelievably incredible. So I'm not trying to dangle the carrot here. I want to help people understand what family constellations are, and actually how it can help them. So I suppose before we get going, maybe you could explain a little bit about yourself and
Yeah,
how you got into constellating.
yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. So I started off singing for a long, long time, and then the singing led me to yoga, and then the yoga led me back to sound, and then the sound led me into constellation. So everything is kind of intertwined. Um, I have been doing this for quite a long time, but I came into constellations almost as a self-healing modality. So everything else was stuff that I'd kind of practiced, and I kind of went into it not just to make money, but I went into it kind of working on myself, but also working for the people. But constellations was never something I intended to actually do. But because it was so profound, as you know, and it's so fascinating and strange, that it's the weird and the wonderful. We talk about this a lot. It's so peculiar when you're in there that I wanted to kind of understand how it worked, because it helped me so much. It came to me in a time I actually did all my training in Brazil, and I was just in Brazil on a massive healing journey. I wasn't doing much singing. I'd had a year where I was kind of out of everything, came back into sound, and then through sound discovered a lady in Brazil called Cecilia, who is an incredible mentor, teacher, wonderful woman. And yeah, she showed me constellations. And when I did my first constellation, I had no idea what I was doing. And as you know, you've had a constellation. If you're just in a room and all of a sudden this stuff happens, it's like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
You can feel the magic. It's almost like you can feel the presence of the energy comes into the room, and it is quite hard to explain, actually. I've
Yeah.
done a good job
We're
of
going to
letting me in,
try.
and still, I'm not sure how to explain it. It's actually
Yes.
called orthogenic field. That's the name that they call it, and I've always known it as the field. In Portuguese, it's called o campo energético. Campo, if you translate it, is field. So it's the knowing field. I even sometimes in visualizations, I see it as a grassy field. It's like you've got. I like this visualization actually, because let me explain what it's about. Family constellations is about um, systems that we're all part of. So it's not just your immediate family, it's not even just your extended family, it's everything that came before. So every person, if you kind of bear with me, because it's quite a lot to visualize, but I see it as you have one person in front, then you have your grandparents. So you've already become, you're from one, then you have two. Then behind that two, you have their parents on either side. So all of a sudden, you've gone from being this one unit to having two people behind you, and all of their energy, all of their trauma, and all of their patterns behind you. Then you have their sets of parents. Then you have their sets of parents. So instead of, instead of being this thing that you're projecting forwards, so you're being bigger as you go forwards. In constellations, it kind of works the other way. It's like it's like a funnel. So you're kind of funneled into the world through this huge network of people behind you. And this is the system. And obviously, with everything, it's like a web, it kind of goes out everywhere. So you're beaming things forward into life, and you're also taking from the life behind you. And they talk about it like a system. So we talk a lot about that, sometimes it's called systemic therapy or systemic family therapy, family constellations, systems work. Like we talk about systems a lot because it is this idea that you're part of a system. You project your system forward, you project your system outwards, and it goes. Is this making any sense?
It's absolutely making sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the idea is that you're never really on your own, and everything that you create in this world has a ripple effect that just goes everywhere. And
Yeah.
and obviously, trauma has become a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but we're all traumatized in some way. Even just coming out of the womb is some kind of trauma, and all of these traumas that we create in life and that are handed down have some kind of effect on us and have kind of effect on everything really. And if you go into these systems, the idea is that this morphogenic field has these things imprinted. So it's like this blueprint that every single thing that's happened to any person in your system, which is, as we've discussed, is massive, has an effect on everybody in it. So nothing ever really goes away. Everything is imprinted somewhere. And with the family constellations work, you get to kind of unravel some of those knots, some of those mysteries. It works in so many different ways, but that's the idea. You get to look at the whole web and sort of not just look at it and be like, well, oh, I know, well, my granddad did that, so that's probably why that's happened, because you can do that in talk therapy if you've got a bit of information. This goes a little bit deeper into how can you deal with something that's happened so long ago, and you might not have one access to that person, you might not understand exactly what happened, but the idea is that it can be felt for generations. Um, and it's, for me, it's a really interesting way, and it's a really easy way. I mean, it's nothing easy about it, but in a sense that it's an easy access point into unraveling some of the mysteries of your family, unraveling some of the mysteries of why you maybe have a pattern that you keep repeating, or you see a pattern in your family that might not even be obvious. It might be a behavioral pattern or something. It's trying to get back to where and why. I could talk about this forever, but
Yeah.
it's making
It's
sense.
fascinating. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
it
So
is.
one of the
Yeah.
things that I think that's probably important to acknowledge from my personal experience being
Mm.
constellated is that you don't actually even have to know much about the
No, you
people
don't.
that are
No.
being that you are
Mm.
accessing through your
Yeah.
treatment. So we've constellated my maternal line and my paternal line.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you have a certain knowledge, and on my mum's side, one of my cousins has done an extensive family tree, so I know loads about that side, but there's still bits I don't really know.
Yeah.
Whereas on my dad's side, it's a bit of a mystery to me. Like I know some bits, but not lots. And we went back from my my grandfather's father. I think that we got that far back, didn't we? I'm trying to think
We
now, but
went one generation more than that. Yeah. We went right,
we
right
went
back.
quite far,
Yeah.
far back, and I honestly have literally
Yeah.
no clue
Yeah.
about any side of that. So, anybody who is, tuning in and they're thinking, well, it wouldn't work for me because
Yeah.
I don't even know about my family. You don't
We
actually
get we
have
get
to.
adopted we get adopted people coming in who
Yeah,
obviously have no information about anything. They don't know about their birth parents, and somehow still the results come out and they get some kind of
yeah,
closure. It's all about making the person feel at peace. That's what
yeah,
your aim is, to make the person who's coming in. Do you have it might be helpful if I explain a little bit how it's set up, how it works, so
yeah,
people can
yeah,
understand what it is. So
yeah,
there are lots of ways to constellate. I recommend trying all of them because they're all different. They'll get different effects and different feedback, but they're all very, very interesting and different. So you can do one-on-ones, um, you can do groups, and you can do it yourself. You can have your eyes closed. You can visualize these things. But the main thing is that you are having a time to just connect with these individual people in the system. So in a group work, you'd come in, and sometimes it will be that you'll be what they call an issue holder. So you're the person who's coming in to specifically focus on your family or problems. It doesn't always have to be about you necessarily. It can be objects and dreams. You can constellate work problems. You can constellate, you know, ideas that you might have, or, you know, so it doesn't always have to be a person you're constellating. Sometimes it can be like a theme. But you come in, you sit down with a person who's facilitating, and you have a big group of people and you're almost observing it. So you don't even participate. And you sit there and you have a brief chat with me, and you just sort of give a bit of background about your family lineage. So we try to steer clear of emotional connections. It's very much about stepping away from the mind, not analyzing it and just giving facts. So when we ask for background, it's quite often that Bert Hellinger, who discovered this actually, so he's the person who kind of founded the family constellations. He was a missionary, a Catholic missionary. He went to South Africa to, you know, spread the word of God, and sort of discovered with the Zulu people that actually, wow, there's something beyond this, that it may be God, it is part of God, but it's a different way of looking at the world. And then he realized how much they kind of respected the ancestors and how important the ancestors were, and how much this affected every decision they made. And he brought it back. And he was quite adamant about not, he was a psychotherapist as well, and he was quite adamant about not getting involved in backstories, not doing any talk therapy, just saying, okay, I'll sit you down, tell me a bit about, tell me why you're here, tell me what would feel good, what do you want to get out of this, and tell me who your mum is, tell me who your dad is, tell me how many brothers and sisters you have, and just kind of getting an idea of who sits where. Because in this system, there is this idea of the orders of love, and these are orders in which things are placed in this system. So it does have some kind of order. One of them is belonging. Everybody belongs. So a lot of issues you encounter when you do this group work is that people get excluded for, you know, people die. You know, a big one actually is abortions and miscarriages, because there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of grief. And so they're kind of hidden because people don't want to talk about them. And that can cause a lot of restrictions in a system. And then you've got things that happened that nobody wanted to talk about. So things that were kind of hidden, or maybe a dad or a grandfather who drank too much and kind of was kind of excluded from the family line because there was so much shame attached to it. So it's one of the orders of love is belonging. Then there's precedence. So the idea is that the people came before have more importance, not more importance, but they need to sit in the right place in the system. So for example, if you get children who kind of parent their parents, and then when you see the constellation, because once you're sitting there, you place the people where you think they belong, and then the magic starts and the people start wandering around, and you sort of see where things are out of place. But you often see people who have mothered their parents putting their parents in the wrong place in the system. So that's another one. So children always take from their parents, parents always give to their children. So there are lots of different
It's
things.
like a kind of like pay it forward
Yeah,
thing with
paying
the
it forward.
ancestors.
Absolutely. The idea is that you are in this web, all of this love and energy has to go forwards, because this is the past, this is the future. And the idea is that you're moving ever forward into your life. And this, if you imagine that circle behind you in this web, you're always aiming forwards. If there's blockages around in this web, you can't move forwards. So the
What
idea
I'm
is
thinking of when you talk about this is there's this guy, philosopher, I don't really know what he was. He's a very like profound and revered speaker called Terence McKenna, and
yeah,
he was heavily into like psychedelics, particularly mushrooms and you know, plant medicine. His brother is a botanist actually, Dennis McKenna, who's, I think he's been on the Joe Rogan Experience. He's been on many podcasts, but Terence McKenna is no longer with us, unfortunately. But he talks about something called the point of singularity, which is in my head almost like I imagine if you were to put your tip of your finger onto your hand, the point where your finger connects to your palm of your hand is the point of singularity. And it's almost like where life manifests.
yeah,
And we can talk
absolutely.
about that as existence, as time. But actually, if you're talking about this in your life as a person, as an individual, the point of singularity is you. And what came before you and what comes in front of you is part of the projection. And but what's manifesting is the connection point. So what you're doing with family constellations is trying to untangle disturbances
Yeah,
in the past, to clear up the passage for the point of singularity, so that
that's
moving
great.
forward,
Yeah,
you literally, it's almost like it's like you're a car mechanic. You cannot drive if if the engine doesn't get fixed. So
yeah,
whatever's caused the problem, you don't need to know, necessarily the drama around it, but actually fixing the actual issue, the problems that come up, will enable the car to move forward and for you to continue with your journey.
yeah.
Um, but that's like the point of singularity really, really was coming up for me, as you were talking about that. And actually, I read a book long before I knew that it was connected to constellations, and it was called "It Doesn't Start with You," or "It Didn't Start with You."
Oh,
Can't
yeah,
remember the name of the author.
yeah. I've forgotten his name
Um,
of it as well. It didn't start with
oh,
you.
it
It's
didn't
an
start with
excellent
you.
book.
He
It's an
used an
excellent book. I will
analogy
bring
in
up the
his
name.
book, and the book the analogy was something like, and I've said this before so many times on so many different podcasts, but this little girl was watching her mum uh, prepare some ham, and she got this joint of ham or whatever, and the mum cut off the ends of it and shoved it into the pot, into the casserole pot to put in the oven. And she said, "Mum, why do you do that?" And she went, "I don't know actually, but my mum always used to do it." And so they contacted her mum and said, why did you always cut the ends off the ham? Like, was
My
it to
mum
add to
always
the
did it.
flavour? Yeah. And then when they found out, when they actually got in touch, and I spoke to the great grandmother of the little girl or whatever, and said, what's the reason for cutting the ends off the ham? She said, "Oh, it's because my casserole pot was too small, so I used to put it in." But the whole family continued with that method, thinking that's the
Yeah,
way you prepare the ham.
yeah,
And it was like, this is a perfect example of how you can carry forward coping techniques for unspoken issues that people carry in their lives without questioning it. It becomes part of your subconscious family operating system. And then when somebody actually goes, "But why are we doing it this way?" You have the power to undo that, enjoy the whole ham,
yeah.
and like continue with your life without that. What was once a coping mechanism has now become a hindrance, because you're actually throwing money away on the food.
Yeah.
You're not
It takes,
preparing.
it's brave
Yeah.
to ask those questions, though. You have to look at the
Yeah.
system. You have to be aware of. I was trying to find the name of that book, actually. I'm going to say it because it's a really
I'll
good book.
Google
I
it. I'll
recommend.
Google it.
I've
I'll
got it
Google
here.
it. Oh,
It's a great book. It Didn't Start With You. It's by Mark Wallen,
that's it.
Wollyn. It's an excellent book.
Yeah.
It's an excellent book. The Body Keeps the Score is actually a great book as well.
And who wrote that one?
I've just had it there and I've closed it.
Because it's in my ones
It's a bit of a
to
mouthful,
read.
that one, actually. Bessel van der Kolk. Excuse
I
me if I'm
will
that wrong.
write these down so that I can
Yeah.
tag them. I'll actually type them up here so we can add them. But just while I'm discussing that book and that kind of system, that pattern, was it, how it relates to astrology, in my opinion. And maybe this is me being biased because I actually have a moon Chiron opposition, is that it does feel this work is very lunar, but it's also very Chiron, because we are dealing with um, I feel like generational trauma,
Yeah.
or generational coping mechanisms, which Chiron is often the wound that we are not even aware of. It doesn't even surface in its entirety until we reach our Chiron return at about 50 years old, and we suddenly go, "This is what I've been healing from or this is what I've been trying to heal from my whole life. This is the thing that's been hindering me, and I didn't understand why." And it could be anything. Like, it could manifest as something going on in your life, um, like a health issue, for example, or a hidden health issue that prior to you having it, everybody in your family's had it. And then you're the person who's suddenly gone, "Well, hang on, no, we've all got it, but I'm the one getting treated for it." So it's like this kind of thing where it's about waking up to and understanding um I think of families like culture, but like understanding your family culture and actually unpicking the unhealthy aspects of that culture. Not necessarily even unhealthy, but the things that aren't actually serving you
Things aren't
anymore.
serving you anymore. Yeah, because I think the thing that I love so much about this work is that I was going through a massive I was diagnosed with cancer. I'm fine now. It was a long time ago. But in being told that I had the cancer, it completely reframed my whole understanding of my body and where I was. And I was like, hang on, there's no cancer in my family. I don't understand where this has come from. Where has this come from? And on my healing journey was when I discovered the constellations in Brazil. And I was really tired of talking about healing. I was really tired of talking about or being seen as somebody who needed to be healed or needed to be a victim, because you go into this when you're in a healing process, especially with the cancer. It's such a, as I say, buzzword. It's such a, everybody understands it, everybody's affected by it. You say that you've had cancer and everyone kind of goes, oh, because they know it all. And it's got such a deep dark resonance about it that is kind of like it instills fear into people, which I understand. I mean, it's taken me a long time to get over the health anxiety aspect of it. But when I looked into my history and I looked into it, I was almost too scared to look into it. I was bored to death of talking about it. Talk therapy didn't work for me, and I was like, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to dwell on it. I'm not the person who wants to stay in this place of victimizing, and that's no disrespect to anybody who does, but there's a lot of people who kind of sit in between that middle ground where they've got some kind of practice. They've done all their astrology. They have, they've read the tarot, they have gone to yoga, they have done all of the stuff, but there's still something that's not quite right and they can't figure it out. And there's this really lovely aspect of constellations, and then it goes right to the point that needs to be fixed. The magic is happens, you get these insights, even if you don't understand them. It affects the whole system, so it affects everybody in a really positive way. But you don't need to talk about it. You don't need to talk about it. You don't need to talk about the habits that have been formed. You can just put everything on the table, let the system kind of speak to you. So it will be that I have to talk about it without talking about it. It's a really hard thing. It's a bit like Fight Club. So because it's something that you can only really see when you're there. But if you've got this
Yeah.
big circle of people, you come with your issue. So say your issue is, I keep getting chest infections. I'm not really sure why. I'm quite a healthy person. I keep getting these chest infections, and I feel like you might have the insight to say, I feel like it's when I'm nervous, or I feel like it's this, I feel like it's that. And then the facilitator will say, okay, looking at the chest, for example, if it were me, I'd say, tell me about your mum, because we carry sadness. And this whole section of mum is the idea is that mum gives you life. She pushes you into life. So if there's any kind of thing about breathing or any kind of thing about this area, the heart and the lungs, they are the life force. They are, they are like the mum. The mum is the person who gives you life. So I would go immediately to the mum. So I would say, look around, choose someone to be your mum. They bring mum in, and then you have this opportunity to face your mum. And I tell you, it's quite a big thing I don't know anybody who can sit there and face their mum in that vulnerable situation in front of lots of strangers and not feel something genuinely. And it sounds like such a small thing, but it's huge.
Yeah.
Especially if there's some kind of disattached emotion with the mum, or the love isn't flowing fully, or maybe the mum is deceased, or maybe you don't know who your mum is, or maybe you have a great relationship with your mum. But in any case, putting in that position is wonderful. Then you can put in her grandmother, because maybe there's not a flow of love coming from the mother line. So then you put the mum behind and then see what happens there. And I'm telling you that it's quite an interesting experience to watch, because these people who have nothing about you, they know nothing about who you are, they've never met your mum, and all of a sudden they start to feel these feelings in their body, which again, it sounds like role play, but it's not. It's in this morphogenic field. There's information that is being exchanged in a way that you can't really explain unless you feel it. And it's we try to stick with, again, not going too much into the mind. So the person who is the representative in there, so the person who in that is representing the mum, you'd say, what are you feeling? And you go into body sensations, because it never really lies. You don't have to use your mind. You're just all about the sensation. So they might be feeling cold, or they might feel moved, they might feel moved to tears, or they might feel anger. And you just work with that. And then as it goes on, the circle fills with different members of the family, different archetypes, and you try to realign them back into their position. So I spoke about belonging before. Everyone has their place in the system. So sometimes people will be looking down, and that means that maybe there was a death that wasn't seen to, or an illness. And by putting everybody back where they should be, as a facilitator, you can see where there might be imbalances. Balance is another order of the love order. So if there's too much on one side and not enough on the other side, you can see how the scales would be tipped, and they might be suffering with a certain ailment. You can see if the dad is missing by putting the father figure in there and allowing that healing to take place. You might not be able to do that in real life. So it's a way of doing it and having that time to having that closure, having that acceptance over what happens. It can be really healing for the system. So it's a way of kind of getting to the crux of it, getting to that, what is it, that single point of
singularity.
That one, without having to burn yourself out, because we've only got one life. It's quite a short life. You cannot do all of the modalities all the time. So for me, it's about finding a way. It was about finding a way to not have to spend years on the shrink bed talking about all my crazy. I could just go there and find a way to unravel it all in a way that felt really wholesome. And because you do feel really, I don't know how you experienced it, but I think you do feel really held in that space somehow, even though it's vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I felt it is vulnerable. It is vulnerable. And I think the first time that I did it, because I had literally no expectation of what was going to happen, I was like nervous. Like, you know how like some people, I know I get people come to me having an astrology reading, they go, I don't want to know when I'm going to die. And I'm like, I'm never going to tell you something like that because A, I don't know. And B, why would I want to scare you? But it's like you kind of have these anticipations about what it's going to be about and what, no idea what to expect, which is what I think is really good to have an episode where people can hear what you've got to say about it and
Yeah.
to kind of understand what it is. But essentially, I think that it's through the vulnerability, and this is so Cancerian, this is so lunar, the cardinality of Cancerians, which is like the cardinality is a mode. People listening, if you want to know about the modes, you can check out my previous episodes. I've done a few on the modes, and then we've got the elements as well. But with the modes, cardinality is like the spark, the match that started the fire, that little spark. And with Cancer, it's a cardinal water sign. And you think, well, how does that manifest with water? But actually, Cancerians lead with their vulnerability. And so this is such deep Cancerian, like lunar work, because you're working through your family. It doesn't matter if you're going through the paternal or the maternal, you're digging up your roots. And you're kind of like figuring out what's been buried in there and what could be causing the leaf rot over here somewhere. But actually, it's important to look at this stuff, and it's not scary either. Like that's the thing that I discovered. It's interesting, and it's like you come away. I was just like I was like speechless the first time we did it because I just couldn't believe what we did. And then the following times, like you go back thinking, what are we going to do this time? And you kind of, even with an expectation of what it's going to be like, you still mind blown moments. Like it's really incredible. And the last one we did, possibly the most mind blowing for me of the lot, actually. But one of the things that I loved was what happens afterwards, basically. Because it's not, sometimes I've had immediate confirmation of something, and other times it's been a slow unfolding. But you can look back and say, wow, look at all this stuff that's happening. It's almost like by healing the past, you're healing your parents' wounds and you're healing your grandparents' wounds. It's like almost like you're going back and you're forgiving and you're giving permission. And it's like stuff they've never heard before.
Yeah.
And though you're working without them there and they're not present, something happens that allows healing to take place for them. So it's like
And it's
you're not just,
transgenerational healing. It's
yes,
transgenerational healing. It's so
yes,
powerful because it's
yeah,
transgenerational. And it's sorry to interrupt there.
no,
It's
no.
like I talk a lot about the web. I know we talk about the field, but I like to talk about it like a spider web, and you're the spider in the middle. And it's if you look at a spider web, it reaches out to it just makes do. So sometimes spider webs appear in the most awkward place in the world, but life will always move forward. Life will always be created. If there was an explosion tomorrow and everything died, life would find a way. Life would find a way. You see life
Mm.
crawling up from, you see plants and leaves and stuff coming out in rubbish bins, and it will find a way to live. So if you imagine this spider web in the middle of nothing and nothingness, and it's found a way to survive and exist. And then, if you think about these tiny vibrations, as a sound therapist, I like to talk about vibrations, because I actually put sound in there sometimes as well. Sometimes I locate what needs to be worked on in a constellation. If somebody's completely stuck, like you said, people come and they're like, I'm too scared. I don't want to be told I'm going to die. I don't want to be told when my exactly the date that my birth chart says I'm going to die. But people come with that same stuckness, and sometimes I use sound to figure out where it's stuck in the body and where we might need to start working. But at the web, if you think about it from a vibrational perspective, if you're working from something, like you said, over here, it might take ages for the ripple effect of that to actually reach you. But then randomly you'll get a call from somebody who you were constellating. So a long lost brother or a friend you were thinking about, or your mum might all of a sudden say something to you, or next time you see her, she might be softer, or she might start talking about your grandmother, or all of a sudden somebody who you haven't spoken to or seen in your system for a while, you might discover that they've had a baby, or they finally conceived, or you don't know where it's affecting. That's the lovely thing about it. It's not going to be night to day. You're not going to wake up suddenly and your life is changed. But that's why it's a consistent work. I've been constellating now since 2018, and participating as a representative, because even if you don't do your own family, there's a lot to be said about standing in somebody's family system as a representative, that somehow it's relatable to your life. So you can get a lot by just doing, when you do the in-person things. Actually, we didn't do it in person, did we? We did the
We've never done it in
online.
person. Yeah, we've
No.
done it online because we're too far
Yeah.
apart otherwise,
Really
but it
too
still
far
works,
apart,
doesn't it?
unfortunately. It does, yeah. I should talk about a little bit about that. So you don't have to, I said there are lots of different ways to do it. You can do it, I do it online with people as well. So I've actually got my people here. They're not, just quickly show them. They're just little, they're going to laugh at my people, I know it. I just use these. It doesn't really matter what you use. They're just little
It
people.
really, this is the thing though, it really works. Like I don't know anything different from doing it in that method.
Yeah,
And for me, it's like it's about, what do they call it? Transactional, transpersonal objects. It's almost like we're using it as a transpersonal, that's a psychotherapy term, I think.
okay.
But like a
Well, it makes sense.
transpersonal object. Yeah.
It's just,
So
you can do, I've done
basically,
it. I've done it with lots of things. I did it with a friend. We just did it around the table, and we just had objects from his bag. So,
oh.
at one point his father was a lip balm, but it works. Yeah, yeah. Afterwards, he was like, "Oh, don't worry about me. I'm just gonna quickly, and I'm just gonna drink my nan." And I was like, "Okay, whatever works, it's fine. Whatever works."
That really is leaning into the moon a bit, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It works. It works. It's about, because in that moment, it's almost like those people aren't really what it goes beyond what you can see with your mind, and somehow that's the magic. People can explain. I could sit here and talk about, Bert Hellinger's everything that he explains and what represents what, but when you're there, it's just a feeling. It's really hard to.
It's
It's for
exactly
me.
the same as being in an astrology reading for me, whether I'm
Yeah,
actually reading for somebody or like in person over Zoom on a recording. Something happens. I guess it's the morphogenic field. And
yeah,
if anybody wants to know a bit more about the morphogenic field, they should read a book called The Science Delusion by, I think it's by Rupert Sheldrake. And he talks about the morphogenic field because I think that he may have coined the term. I don't know.
Possibly. It's new to me,
Yeah.
this term, actually. I
I think
didn't,
he
I
coined
just,
the term, and that book is great. It's like a kickback against the God delusion by Richard Dawkins. I
yeah,
don't know if you've ever read that book, the Science Delusion, but it is it for me it gains momentum. Like you start listening and you think, oh, it's a bit slow, and as it starts going, I just by the end of the book, I was like, I don't want it to stop. I don't want it to stop. It's a great book, and it talks all about how we live in a mechanist society and how we're built around things having to have tangible, physical, you know, you have to be able to prove things. But
yeah,
this morphogenic field, it's like there's some scientific backing. Like for example, when a mother's baby cries and she knows it needs feeding, her body
yeah,
feels it. But
yeah,
sometimes the baby can be in another building completely, and the mother will
yeah.
still have that sensation because she knows her
Intuition
baby
is
needs
part of
her.
that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
intuition and gut feeling is massively connected to that. But it
yeah,
goes, if you
yeah,
think about it in nature, sometimes I read this once, well, the first time, because for me, I've always known it as the campo, the campo, the energetic field or the knowing field. So as I said, I did a lot of my studies in Brazil. But when I came here, I was like, well, I'll just call it the field because that's how I'm
yeah,
translating. And then
yeah.
I was doing some studies because obviously I'm continue to study family constellations. It's my newest thing. I've been doing sound now for about 10 years. I've been teaching yoga for 15 years. And again, Pilates has just become part of that. But this is my newest thing. And I keep being amazed at what I'm learning. And what was I talking about? The morphogenic field in nature. So they talk about the fact that this exists in nature. So, the fact that animals are born and they know instinctively what to do and where to go. Like
Yeah.
these baby turtles,
Mm,
they know where they need to go. They know how they need to do it. How do they need to do it? It's because their
mm,
ancestors have done all of the work. They've taught them certain things. The fact that you get people who are really artistic and then it maybe misses a generation, but it never stops. It hits the person, and you notice that there's similarities between different people from different parts in the system. It doesn't always work linear. It's not linear. Nothing in this
mm.
universe is linear. So
No.
it hits and misses people, and people grab it. And there's this thing in constellations which is really interesting called blind love. It's all about loyalty, and so you might be connected with somebody from the past in this almost like blind love. And the thing is about this need to belong is that as humans, our need to belong is bigger than anything else. They did experiments, or that they've constantly doing experiments about this because it's such a fascinating subject. The fact that people can be abused and people can have these awful situations, but because it's familiar, and especially children, that's why child abuse is such an awful thing because it's all you've ever known. When you're born into a family, it's all
Mm,
you've ever known. And so the familiar, especially like, I do a lot of work with the nervous system, it would prefer an awful hostile environment than something new because its job is to protect you. So we have this built kind of mechanism of liking and preferring the familiar. And so if you're born into a family, what other experience do you know other than, like you said, when you go to somebody else's family, you're like, oh, hang on a minute, I can see it's really clearly, it's obvious. Especially when you get married or you're in a partnership and you have in-laws to deal with, that's a whole different thing because you're like, well, I'm not accepting that because that's
mm,
weird, or that doesn't
mm,
resonate with me, that's unkind, or why are they treating you like that way. And that lots of arguments come from that because it's like, well, I don't really know how else to be. But it's and this is connected with the blind love, but they did experiments about children and babies because obviously it's much more most of the stuff starts from childhood. So like often in these constellations we do go back to childhood, and you can see that because you'll have somebody who comes in the room and they'll just sit down. You're like, oh, okay, they're sitting down, they're a child. That's a way of showing me that they're small. They see themselves as small. And so we go back to childhood and we deal with a lot of stuff because a lot of the stuff comes from the root of what happens in childhood. And not always bad stuff, sometimes it's positive stuff, but it does have its root there. And yeah, the experiment was that they discovered that the need for a child to belong to have a connection with its mum is so great that when the mum goes, when the baby's really, really small, it's like a heroin addiction. The feeling of loss is like a heroin withdrawal. So when a baby is like screaming and crying, and especially now in the culture, it's like, oh, let it self-soothe, let it self-soothe. This baby's going through some kind of withdrawal that is huge because that's all it's ever known. So, things like having that that happen in really, really early childhood has massive implications for the future. That is a huge blockage in the system. So often it comes back down to these, small thing like mum's going back to work, or it's not anyone's fault. No one's blaming anybody, but it's like a thing that can affect the whole system.
You're talking about blind love, and it's almost like when people say love is blind. And
Yeah.
what I'm thinking is when you see, I'm so conscious of this because, I've been involved in different families in quite an intimate way in my life. I've had friendships where I've been almost part of the family. And when you go into that family system, that immediate family system, you notice how they do things differently to you. And you
Yeah.
notice how sometimes people get treated differently, but they just don't do anything about it.
That's a
And
big
you'd
one.
say to your friend or to your partner, to your husband or whatever, why do you let them do that? And they go, oh, that's just how it is. And you think, but that's not that's not fair. You're always getting the most responsibility, or they're always like pecking away at your confidence, or this, that, and the other. And it's almost like in what would normally stand in real life, going to work, walking down the street, socializing with your friends, what would normally stand as unacceptable can continue in a family without anyone ever batting an eyelid and thinking it's totally normal and acceptable. So in some ways, when you talk about like love is blind or the blind love, that is what I think of when you say it. So how do you think that
It,
that connects?
it does definitely connect, because we are part of systems, and our need to belong is to do with this kind of invisible force that's between people, but it's not always even in this generation. So you can have a blind love, loyalty, attachment to somebody you've never even met. So if somebody was excluded from the system, so something was omitted, somebody wasn't kind of spoken about, like I spoke about previously, like if there was something that happened and someone was taken away from the system, like war is a big one. So if somebody died in a war
Mm,
and didn't have anything going forward, um, there can be somebody in the immediate future who has a blind attachment to this person and kind of repeats patterns or has a similar kind of ending. So, this can sometimes explain things like suicides, illnesses, problems conceiving, uh, just hostile experience, depression,
self-sabotage.
self-sabotage, a feeling that another one, it's a really nice one well, it's not really nice, it's awful, but we all go through it, is with this blind love, is that you can never be bigger than your parents. So if your
Mm,
parents, and we talk about this a lot about the money mindset, if you've always had parents who have said things like money doesn't grow on trees, and you have to work for things, you have to work really hard for it, never take a day sick, and all of that sort of mentality, where does that come from? Where does that come
mm.
from? And that is, it's not even just about the words, but if you hear that all the time, there's this blind attachment that you can have to your parents, that you can never be bigger than them, because we've got so much love and respect for our parents that there might be a blind kind of loyalty in that, well, I can't be bigger than them, or I
Yeah.
can't raise my child differently to my
And
mum
it
because they're,
also sort of makes me think about the fact that when a child is sort of between 1 and 3, they need so much from their parents.
yeah,
But up to the age of 8, they are like little machines that get programmed. So up until about 8 years old, you say things like, if you're somebody that just always goes, "Oh, typical, that was always going to
yeah,
happen to me. I'm the one that's this bad stuff happens to." Like if
yeah,
you're that kind of person who just kind of like says that, or if you're, anything, that's just the one that sprang to mind. They're going to grow up thinking, they're impressionable at that point, and they're going to grow up with that kind of belief system in place.
yeah,
And studying hypnotherapy myself, I understand how important it is to understand belief systems, because belief is about not just about what we believe about how life is, but actually about what we can achieve in life based on those beliefs.
yeah.
So it's literally like about understanding where we limit ourselves, whether it's a conscious knowledge of what our beliefs are, or whether it's a subconscious programming that we've received through our parents who may not even understand that they're projecting their
Often it's
programming.
connected. often it's
Yeah.
connected. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Often it's connected. Often you're like,
Mm,
where does this belief come from? And it's so
mm,
deep. And we latch. That's what I was saying about the familiarity. We latch onto these things because it's all you've ever known. It's like, well, if I'm not this, who am I? I've always been
mm.
this way. And then there's a, when you study this stuff, because I think there's a, obviously I'm studying it as well. So my journey is going to be different maybe to somebody who just comes to a constellation. But even still, it's quite fascinating when you look into your family and why people are the way that they are. And you can kind of offer some healing without actually having to sit down and talk to your mum and dad and be like, why are you like this?
Yeah.
Why do you feel this way about
It's
money? Where did
almost
it start
like
from?
from my sessions that I've had with you, um, it provides closure in some
Yeah.
way. And you don't have to speak to that person. Like I've never talked about what happened during those sessions with anybody but you.
Mm.
And it's the first session I had, I think I've said they're all profound. They're so profound, all of them in different ways. But the first one was like something that I uncovered while I was studying counseling skills. I uncovered something really interesting about my beliefs. That was something that kind of happened. It was like the programming I received from a very young age. And when we constellated, we went back and we realized that potentially this started further back with like my great grandfather.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what's really amazing about it is that I got to forgive myself. I forgave, the people in my lineage who were part of creating that coping mechanism,
Yeah.
and understanding their rationalizations which they carried forward. They were like, well, that's why that happened, so therefore, like for example, like in a nutshell, my mum was taking my great grandfather his breakfast one morning. She put it slightly out of reach. They were caring for him, and he passed away when she went to school, and she always beat herself up about the fact that she thought that it was her fault because she put his breakfast slightly out of reach. And then when she was pregnant with me, her father got terminal cancer. And then after I was born, he passed away. And so she always told me that, she always felt like she had to make, he had to die in order to make space for a new life. But
Yeah.
how that was interpreted by me as a child and as an adult was, if I have a baby or get pregnant, somebody's going to die.
Yeah.
And actually, it's one of those things that it's a really, really damaging, limiting belief because it could have potentially stopped me from having children.
Yeah.
And actually, I didn't. I had a little boy, and I'm so glad that I did. But it's just one of those things where we went back and we looked at the issue and we forgave people, we let people rest,
Yeah.
and what happened immediately after that constellation. I mean, what I'm doing is really oversimplifying it because what happened
Yeah.
was we got into this thing, we got into the field,
Yeah.
and the magic started to happen. And before I knew it, this was a real thing with real people. Even though we were
Yeah.
using those little dolls,
Yeah.
in my head, I'm a visual person. It was real people. And what I imagine as well, actually, is that they're actually here with me when we're doing it. Like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
right here. We
Yeah, they
can't
are.
see them, but they're here.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so essentially, what was really interesting about my constellation was you said, look out for little signs because sometimes things come along to give you a little nod. And after I finished constellating, I noticed something had come through my letterbox and I opened it. And I was going to a gig that day. I think it was that later that day. And my mum had posted me tickets for this gig. And inside the envelope, she'd put this little wooden heart inside it, which was just like my mum does lovely little things. But the timing was just impeccable.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it said on the heart, but it was something about love and forgiveness and like this kind of this beautiful thing that like it's like even to talk about it, it's like moving me to tears almost. Like it's just like it's so deeply profound. And the tickets, just as a side note, because I just think it's really interesting, were tickets to see Kula Shaker, which is like my favorite band from when I was a like teenager. Like I was obsessed with them and love them still. And I finally got tickets to go and see them. And what was really interesting was that I loved the lead singer. His mum was an actress, Her name is Hayley Mills. He's Crispian Mills. She's Hayley Mills, famous actress, was in The Parent Trap, the original Parent Trap, the Disney film. And then her father is Sir John Mills, another actor. So their family is a generation of actors. I was going to see him perform that night, and his each generation was important to my family or had a part in my family's upbringing. Like my grandmother and my mum watched Sir John Mills. My mum loved Hayley Mills growing up. I watched Hayley Mills growing up because I watched the films my mum loved. And then I got into the music of her son. And it's just weird how on that day that we constellated and I was dealing with my first ever transgenerational healing experience, I then went out and partied. And I had this like moving experience while I was there because watching the gig and having these like revelations while I was watching, thinking this is like transgenerational too. Like it
Yeah,
just kind of
it
blew
is.
my mind. And
But it gives you the opportunity to, like, I like to say a lot because we use it that, once these things have come, so I think it can sound quite overwhelming to think that you're going to go there, everything's going to be uncovered and you're just going to be like, oh God,
no,
what do I
it's we
do?
do little
Yeah.
it's little
You-
little things, isn't it? You
yeah,
you
it's
deal with
little
one
things, but
issue at a time, really.
yeah, and you also using kind of healing phrases to try to calm it down a little bit. So once you see the issue, or once you see the entanglement, we call them entanglement. So you see the little kind of kink in the weave of this massive tapestry. You see that and you kind of unkink it, if that's even a
Mm,
word.
yeah.
And then you use these phrases because I think it's really important to understand when you talk about forgiveness in this context. I like to say that acceptance is not the same as agreement. You don't have to agree, especially when
Yes.
sometimes quite dark things can come up
Yeah.
and you can be deeply hurt by that. And you might not have the power or the will to be able to forgive that. And it's okay. Also, that happens as well a
Mm,
lot where it comes out
mm,
and you're just like, actually, I cannot look at this right now, or I cannot
yeah.
forgive this right now. And you
Mm,
get members of the family that will look at it for you. So you can also say things like, I cannot look at this right now. It was too heavy for me to carry. I leave this
mm,
with you. And you get to release these burdens. And I'm sure that you felt freer that night because you
yeah.
released this massive, guilt.
Yeah.
Imagine carrying that
Yeah.
guilt, mum carrying that guilt, you carrying this guilt, you carrying this fear that bringing life into the world means that something is dying.
Yes.
It's a huge miscommunication
Yeah.
that can be carried forward. And
and
thank
it
God
and it
that you are
happened at a
able to
time
face
like
it.
so as a child. So what do they talk about? They talk about magical fear, magical thinking, and death permanence. So I was at a stage in my life where I was able to do magical thinking. So I have the power to kill somebody if I have, baby's new life kills old. Like obviously,
Yeah.
when we look at the cycle of life, there's some truth in this, but it's not I'm not going to have I'm not the direct player here. I'm not the person who's going to cause that problem. Life it's going to run its course and it
Yeah,
will
life
go
is
back into the
cyclical.
earth.
It's
Yes,
going to keep going
exactly.
around. So if you look
But
at it that
crossing
way,
over with
there's
the
the
death
end and the beginning are the
permanence,
same point, aren't they? The end and the
yes,
beginning are the same point at every phase of the
yes,
circle, but we're not responsible for it. And I think
exactly.
that it takes off the responsibility off of one person. I mean, I still say that it's really brave work. Anybody who comes and sits and they go into this, they're brave. It's a brave thing. I constellated recently. I did a workshop that was a whole weekend. And I was like, I'm just going to go and represent and I'm going to learn. And I ended up, there I go, boom, something happened. And I was like, I need to constellate this. And it was probably one of the most profound ones I've had. I think they all are, but I've probably constellated in total only in this whole journey from 2018 till now. I've only actually constellated my family about 4 times. So it's every time you do it, it's brave, it's big, it reveals a lot of things, but also it uncovers, it's not something that you do all the time. We did it 3 times, but we've done it over, probably 6 months between each one because you don't have to keep
I think it's more
doing
like
it.
9 months. I think what we were talking about actually was actually how it relates, doesn't it, to astrology as well? Because
Yeah.
you were talking about what you do, but you were saying like when the issue holder picks you to represent,
Yeah, that's
um,
also relevant. That's also
that
relevant.
that is like, and you said there's points in there for you. It relates to you in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that we could explain that by looking at your synastry. You can look at your synastry and understand the relationship you have between the issue holder and yourself. But bigger than that, larger than that, are things like what planetary alignments bring you to constellate at the time. I think the
Yeah,
first
that's a
time I
good one.
constellated, I had the sun moving on, it was on my midheaven that day. And, the midheaven and the IC are an axis, very, very personal, because it's one of the time sensitive axis that changes every minute or so. And well, every 4 minutes, the ascendant changes every 4 minutes, the midheaven and the IC also similar. But actually, that is a very, very, it's very connected with your lineage. It's very connected with the mother and the father. So to be constellating on that day and, it highlighting that axis for me was really interesting. The next time we constellated, it was to do with my dad. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember what happened, but I know my dad's moon was highlighted. I don't know if the sun was on my dad's moon, or I can't really remember, but I remember thinking, wow, like, it's like highlighting my dad's side. And then the last time we constellated, there were other aspects. I think my moon, can't remember now, but it always seems to line up. It always seems to. I think the sun was on my moon the last time.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
it wasn't supposed to happen on that day. It was, I remember you
yeah,
saying it's
it just
lined
wasn't
up
meant
in a
to.
day where the astrology is perfect for this. I remember you
Yes,
saying
it
that
happens when it's
it
meant
happened
to.
on a
It doesn't,
day.
you
Yeah.
don't, it's almost like the moment chooses you
Yeah,
rather than
definitely.
you choosing the moment.
And you feel like you
But
just
actually
cannot
this,
not do it, I think. When it
yes,
happens, when if you feel the calling, it's a bit like I talk a lot, I'm not going to go into plant medicine, but if you have a calling from a plant medicine, it just you just like it just appears and it's just like you need to do it. Or if you
mm,
all of a sudden feel like you need to look into astrology, you'll look and your it will be exactly as it needs to be for whatever it is that you need to do.
well, for
Like I
me, it
feel
was my
like
Saturn return. It was
yeah,
like when I
yeah,
got to my first astrology class, I didn't know it was at the time. It was
it's
only when I'd been
amazing.
studying it for a few years, I looked back and I was like, wow, this is my Saturn return.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which is quite
I had
amazing.
mine in the Amazon in the jungle with ayahuasca. So I mean, everyone's where
I
they're
was
meant
at
to
the London
be.
School of Astrology and you were in the
Yeah,
jungle.
yeah,
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 so but I think the other thing that's really interesting with how it can tie up, and which is how I think that you and I are going to be working together from moving forward, is if we decide to do, we've been talking about potentially doing some kind of work together, haven't we?
yeah,
And
definitely.
looking at your family tree, but in a kind of astrological viewpoint. I know I've
Yeah.
looked back over the past 18 months, possibly more, 2 years, I've been having some revelations which have been uncovering aspects of my family, my ancestry that I have been blind to because I have got what you would look at the chart and understand as um, not blockages, but like there are difficulties in accessing that information and connecting with it. But having these transits that I've had and doing this constellation work has helped me to open up. So like I've been doing this, I've got Uranus in my 12th house. The 12th house is like the murkiest, the most difficult to kind of see clearly. But having that planet there that is like very it's not even illuminating, it's almost like it clears everything in a way, has helped me to access that area of my brain, almost my knowledge, and my ability to see things. And actually, I've got Chiron in there, which I've already connected to family
I was
constellations
going to
because I
say
really think
Chiron
that
is the
Chiron,
one, isn't it, that's
I
connected
really
when
feel like it's very
yeah, you
connected.
speak because I'm interested about I don't know much about astrology, everybody, so sorry about that, but I know that when you talk about family constellations, you talk a lot about the Chiron
Yeah.
aspect. How is that connected exactly?
Well, it's difficult to say really because my Chiron's in
Yeah.
the 12th house, but
Yeah.
I've been connecting with Chiron a lot more. And I know that Chiron is connected to generational wounds.
Okay.
And when I was reading It Doesn't Start With You by Mark Wallin, or It Didn't Start With You, which I will connect to that book, I will tag it below, I'll put a link. I remember reading that book at the time without knowing about family constellations, going, this book is basically about Chiron, but it's not an astrology book. So anybody who wants to understand what Chiron's about, you can read that book and you will have a clearer understanding of how generational wounds can
Yeah.
affect you and how it can play out in your life in real time. It gives loads of really good examples in that book of how people are triggered at certain times in their life, which completely relates to like ancestors who've had events occur that they were the same age when it happened, and that's this kind of thing. So it's really interesting. And I don't think you need to have a moon Chiron opposition to understand that. You can still be working with the moon, working with Chiron. Like you said, we're dealing with limitations. So Saturn, we're dealing with belief systems. So Jupiter. So there's loads of different things. And also, you're talking about the love blindness or whatever you called it. And that I feel like might connect to Venus because it's about how we, relate to our families and how we, what we value in our families in order to stay accepted and have a place where we belong. I don't think it's like easy to isolate it to one single thing, but I do think that this work is very Chiron. It's very Chironic, and actually, there's no you can accept, you can forgive, and you can move forward, but you can't change what happened in the past, and that's the
No.
point of Chiron. It doesn't make it not have ever happened. It just helps you to accept and to understand that this is sometimes, the things that you're constellating, you can't change them in the present, but you can change your you can heal the past through sort of forgiveness, acceptance, and kind of laying to rest some issues that will always be part of who you are, but you aren't going to you're not going to fix yourself, but you might actually, by healing the
Reorganize your
past, you've
feelings about it. You can
yeah,
reorganize your feelings about it and the feeling that the aftermath of something that
yes,
happened. You can sort of, because it's easier because you're removed from it, you can just put a little bit of calm over it. So you can just
yeah,
reorganize it and just say, okay, this has been put to rest now, in a way
yes.
that just like it kind of heals it all. It just sort of
But like
puts
we
it
said, it is
there.
very real. It's not just about like, oh, we sat here, we said this, we put it to rest now, and that's it because I said so. It's actually, no,
Mhm.
you're doing the work. It's real
Yeah,
work. And that is kind of like with Chiron, he is the wounded healer. He never, ever, ever recovers from the injury that he sustained, but he can live his life with coping mechanisms and understand that this is how I can move forward and I can heal others with my knowledge. So, for example, you as a constellator, a family constellation facilitator, you are able to work through some of your injuries, your previous injuries,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
then you can go and you can help people with the knowledge that
And
you've
all,
learned.
and another ironic thing about this is that since I've been on this journey, I'm constantly put in the place of the person with great health, or and it's almost like a chance for me to feel myself, because you feel the feelings. So as I said, it's not always representing people. Sometimes it's an emotional or a feeling or a fear. And if you're put
Mm,
into this position of like, you know, love or the mother, like it's very, very, I'm a mum myself. I've got an 8-year-old girl, and it puts me in a position where I'm able to see how my feelings and my words, my self-talk, the way that I see the world, the little things that I say will affect her. And
mm,
it allows me to see what it's like when I am pulsating, full vibrational, all of the lovely words, feeling fit and healthy and wonderful and safe in my body, as opposed to feeling maybe a bit fearful in my body because I had a cancer diagnosis. So it allows me to feel how good that feels. And that's extremely beneficial, because when you're put into those positions, and I know that it happens with the dolls as well. So if you're almost connecting with the feelings of the people, and that could be really
mm,
beneficial to
mm,
just kind of like feel these feelings that you might necessarily feel. So it's a chance to experience what other people might have felt, but also work on how you're then healing other people because you recognize how they might be feeling. So it's a really lovely. I mean, I love the work, as you can
yeah.
tell.
Yes, yeah,
It's
that's
lovely.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how are people going to be able to get I don't know, what do you call it? Like constellate with you?
Yeah,
Um,
constellate with me. So I've just come back off of like a sabbatical, I'd say, and I'm kind of opening up my books now. So I do have a page, an Instagram page, which is Sounding Self. I'm still working on the website. It's a constant work in progress, but you can always reach me through Instagram, and we can just arrange bookings like that. So I'd say a usual constellation goes between about 50 minutes to an hour and 15. Often I'll then kind of do check-ins. Again, it depends. I don't push the work, I don't force the work. So it's kind of led by the person. But yeah, the best way to get me at the moment is through my Instagram. I post all my weird singing sound stuff through there as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, people can also contact me
Yeah.
if you'd like, because I'm like the mercurial connector of all people and
Yes.
things. So yeah, if you want to email stelliumastro@gmail.com, it's changed a few times. But there will be a link. You can email me or get in touch in other formats. I know whenever I mention this to people, they're always like, I want to do this. So this is a good opportunity now for you guys to actually connect with
You've been
Karis.
a great inspiration to me through this because it's like a work that you never really feel like you're ready to do. Like, I don't know if that resonates at all, but it's such a special, wonderful work. And I never take for granted the fact that I'm working with people in their real lives and
Mm.
their emotions and how deep the work is and how important it is and how respectful I need to be. So it's a great responsibility,
Yes, with great power comes great
Yeah,
responsibility.
exactly.
Anybody born um, around the time of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the 1980s, 1982, 3, 4,
Yeah, there we go.
we
That's me.
understand that phrase. We get it. Yeah, so yes, I would love to hook you up with people who are interested to work with
Yeah,
you. So anybody
absolutely.
who is listening, watching right now and thinking, wow, this sounds amazing. I really want to do it. Just get in touch.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you want to point your potential followers or clients to? What's your
Yeah.
Instagram handle?
Well, I run female, well, they were female, but now, the world is changing and men are kind of more interested in it. I get a lot of men now, which is wonderful. But I used to run female sort of led moon circles or just circles where I tried to ask Steph for good moons, and then I would do my circles on moons, and where it's just sound therapy and singing, standing under trees and banging drums and stuff, which is really deep tribal ancestral work. And it's I use ancestral sounds and healing sounds, and now that is kind of intertwined with the constellations, and I'm starting to consider taking it kind of combining the two. So I'll often, like I said, I use sound a lot in my constellation. Sometimes the sound is trapped and it's not a word or a healing phrase, but it's a sound that comes out. So I really like to bring that in, which is something I guess new that's not really been done before, or maybe it has, but I haven't seen it. But it seems to work well. So I'm trying to figure out, well, I've just moved as well. So I've just moved out of London. Now I'm close to Brighton. So I'm just kind of new to the area and trying to get the feelers out. But I would like to arrange a big kind of group session as well. So I'll keep you posted of where that is. And if anyone wants to come to that one, then I'll keep posting stuff on Insta.
I guess you're going to just have to stick a mailing list link in your link tree
Yeah,
or something at some
yeah, it's
point.
true. Yeah,
You
it's
definitely
true.
need to get that sorted. So okay, I really enjoyed the chat. It's
Yeah,
been
thanks
really
for having me
interesting and
so
actually
much.
it's been
Hope it made
really
sense.
it did make sense and it was really interesting because we've talked about this before, but I really got to hear you wax lyrical about it.
Yeah,
So yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, hopefully soon we'll get some more constellating done. I want to
yeah.
write about it now. I just want to write about my experiences. And
Oh,
just before
amazing.
we go, just so people understand, Caris has got a Capricorn moon and
I
Virgo
was going to say, you need
rising.
to talk about my astrology because I've
Well,
just
you've
been
got
rambling a bit.
yeah, so she's a Gemini. She's a
Yeah.
Gemini sun, Mercury in Gemini, and she's got Virgo rising and a Capricorn moon. So she's earthy, but she's got that very mercurial flavor. But actually, Caris has approached this as a real discipline, and she has not tried to run before she can walk. She's been so cautious. I've admired her approach actually, because I think that when it came to astrology, I decided to just sort of like not completely going all guns blazing, but I just wanted to get going and just hit the ground running. Whereas like Karis has perfected her craft actually. And the last time we constellated, I was like half in awe of what was going on, and the other half of me was just like, wow, watch her go. She's amazing. She's just so good. So yeah, I can't wait for you
It's
to
different. It's different approach. Yeah. Sorry, just to keep, I'll wrap it up. This is like a typical Gemini. Just one more thing. Just one more thing.
just one
But
more thing.
yeah, just one more thing. But I mean, it's the approach to this has been very, very different to everything else I've done. Like with yoga, I just jumped in, and with the sound therapy, I just felt like I did it. But I think it's because it's such a profound, deeply personal work that I just feel the depth of the responsibility of it. And I
Yeah,
think that
it's huge.
it's
It is
huge,
massive.
yeah.
It's how I
And
feel
it's not
about
just
it. Yeah.
feeling it, it's also then how do you deliver that? How do you make someone feel comfortable? And then how do you give, because at the end they say, I'll wrap up with this, but they say that you know when the constellation is done if the person is at peace. So, you never know how long it's
Yeah.
going to last, but it's about giving the person what they need to feel at peace.
Yes.
And that's a great
Yeah.
way to end it, isn't it? It's a great way to end a
Yes.
podcast as
Yeah.
well. But yeah.
Yeah, it is. So thank you very much because I feel
Thank
at
you for
peace
having
now.
me.
You're
Yeah, good.
welcome.